First thing you need to know about that morning is that nobody was ready. Not the coffee, not the debrief, and definitely not us. It was 0540 in the gray room. That's what we called it, not because of any official designation, just because everything in it was gray. Gray walls, gray folding chairs, gray light bleeding through one reinforced window. Fort Bragg in November has this way of making the air feel like wet cardboard. You breathe it in, you feel heavier. You sit down in those chairs, and something in your spine says, this is not a day for surprises. We had a new intake. 3 names on the roster. All 3 transfers, which already made Sergeant First Class Doyle irritable. He didn't trust transfers. He had a saying, never once funny, always said like scripture, transfers come in carrying somebody else's bad habits. He said it that morning too, shuffling papers at the front of the room, his boots squeaking slightly on the floor because he'd caught them in last night's rain. I was sitting in the second row, left side. I remember that because the chair leg was uneven and I kept listing toward Malone, who kept listing back like 2 tired trees leaning against each other in wind. You see the roster? Malone said, not quite whispering. Yeah. Third name. I looked at the printout on my knee. Rivera, Daria Kappa Specialist e Quattro. Transfer. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Classification. Redacted. Malone made a sound with his teeth. Sort of a TCH. Navy. Navy, I confirmed. The thing about a room full of Army and some Marine cross attachments is that Navy already starts with a minor atmospheric deficit. It's not malice. It's just there are things you assume. Differences in culture, in methodology, in the very basic religion of how you move through a building. We didn't know anything about this woman yet, and we already had a posture about her. That's the honest truth. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to scrub it from the record either. She walked in at 0547, 13 minutes late, which Doyle clocked in real time. I watched his jaw shift. She was carrying a duffel that looked like it had been through a flood, a fire, and a bureaucratic dispute. Army green with black duct tape across one strap. The duffel itself said nothing. She herself said nothing. She scanned the room, not nervously, not the way new people scan a room to find where they fit, more the way you scan a room when you're deciding whether anything in it poses a problem. Nothing in us posed a problem. She took a seat. End of the last row. Right side. Doyle looked up from his papers. She looked up at Doyle. A beat passed. One of those beats that has a whole conversation inside it, and none of it spoken. Rivera, Doyle said. Present, she said. Flat. Not rude. Just compressed. Doyle made a mark on his clipboard. The other 2 transfers, Galloway, massive, from Fort Campbell, and a kid named Prentice who looked like he was maybe 19 and had that particular anxiety that 19-year-olds carry in rooms full of people who've done things. Both were watching her. We all were, in the way you watch something you don't entirely have category for. The debrief moved. Integration protocols, mission parameter reviews, equipment assessment schedules. The usual architecture of a first morning. Half my brain was in it. Half my brain was running background process on the woman in the last row. 32 minutes in, Doyle asked the room a standard orientation question. Anybody want to tell me what they see as their primary combat function, so I know what I'm working with? Galloway said close protection, breaching, HVT extraction. Standard. Good. Prentice, sweating slightly, said reconnaissance and communications. Doyle nodded, made his mark. He looked at Rivera. She said, without any particular inflection, without any setup, without any awareness that it was going to be a thing, SEAL Combat Master. CQC specialization, underwater demolitions, advanced sniper certification. Secondary, psychological operations, and asset handling. She said it the way you say your breakfast order. The room went quiet for about half a second. Then Galloway laughed. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was the laugh of a man who has decided something is absurd and hasn't yet checked whether he's right. Malone made that TCH sound again. 2 of the Marine cross attachments exchanged a look. Even Prentice, God help him, smiled a little, looking at the floor like he didn't want to be caught at it. I didn't laugh. I'm not going to tell you. It's because I'm more enlightened than those men. It's because something about the way she said it, the compression of it, the total absence of performance, did a thing to the back of my neck. A small animal thing, like a flag on a still day, lifting 1 inch and settling back. Doyle didn't laugh either. Say that again, he said. Not challenge. Just clarity. She said it again. Same words. Same inflection. SEAL Combat Master. CQC, I heard you, Doyle said. He made a different kind of mark on his clipboard. A longer one. Assessment begins 0800 Thursday. Until then, you integrate with the team, draw your equipment, and read yourself into the mission file. Questions? No, Sergeant. Good. He moved on. Professionally. But when he turned to the whiteboard, I saw him pause one extra beat. Half a second where his hand held the marker without writing anything. That half second was a question he didn't ask out loud. After debrief, the room fragmented the way rooms do. People clustered, people peeled off, the small gravitational systems of an established team reforming around the new variables. Rivera was a new variable nobody quite knew how to orbit. Galloway pulled me aside near the equipment cage, grinning. SEAL Combat Master, he said, doing her voice, sort of flattening it out even further. CQC Specialization. Underwater Demolitions. He shook his head. Navy sends us a comic. You don't know what she is, I said. I know what she sounds like. I didn't answer that. The thing was, he wasn't wrong that it sounded a particular way. A woman, E4, walking into a room of combat seasoned personnel and reciting credentials that would be extraordinary for anyone, let alone a specialist. It had the texture of a story that doesn't add up. The math of it fell off. SEAL Combat Master certification isn't something you get by accident or by checking a box. It's a designation so rare they barely track it in standard personnel systems. Most people in that room had never met one. Some didn't believe the certification existed in its current form. But something about the delivery. It wasn't bragging. Bragging has warmth in it. Even bragging, even the aggressive kind. Bragging wants an audience. She didn't want an audience. She had answered a direct question with the most accurate information available to her. That's a different thing. I want to draw my equipment. She was already at the cage. She'd moved through the system faster than anyone. The equipment officer, a civilian contractor named Beaumont, who had been processing gear for 11 years and was unimpressed by essentially everything, was looking at her paperwork with an expression I'd only seen on him once before, when he'd had to process clearance documentation for an operator whose file was 90% black bars. You're going to need to call upstairs, Rivera said to him. Yeah, Beaumont said. Quiet. Yeah, I am. She waited, arms loose at her sides. Not impatient. Not performing patience either. Just waiting the way a machine waits. Present and doing nothing and entirely capable of something. I signed for my equipment and left. I thought about that the rest of the day. Lunch was MRE day. Wednesday, ritual. We sat on the long benches in the break room with our mystery pouches, and Malone had found a bag of pretzels from somewhere and was distributing them with the generosity of a man who wants to be liked. Rivera sat at the far end. Prentice, who was young enough that his social anxiety sometimes overrode his tactical instincts, sat down near her with his tray, gave her a kind of nod and smile combination that was genuinely good-hearted. So, he said, you were really in DevGru? She looked at him, not unkindly. I'm here now. Right. Yeah, obviously. I just meant, he gestured, somehow indicating the whole trajectory of her career with one hand. That's a serious path. It's a path, she said. And that was sort of it for lunch conversation. Galloway, 2 seats over, eating his MRE with the focused efficiency of someone who treats nutrition like a tactical problem, said without looking up. Underwater demolitions, though. We're not exactly swimming distance from the objective. Quiet laugh from the Marine into the table. Rivera didn't react. Not even in the small ways. No flicker at the jaw. No shift in posture. She opened her MRE with one practice motion and started eating. I'm just saying, Galloway continued. It's a specific specialty for an inland posting, is all. Specializations are cumulative, she said. Not situational. He looked at her then. First direct look, I think, since debrief. Come again. What I know doesn't stop being useful because the terrain changed. He chewed, considered, made a face that wasn't quite a concession, but wasn't entirely not one. Malone offered her a pretzel. She took one without making anything of it. Malone looked at me with an expression that said, "She took the pretzel, so that's something." I ate my MRE. Outside, it had started to rain again. That night, I ran into Doyle in the hallway near the admin offices. Late. After 2100, he was carrying a folder, actual physical folder, which already meant something, and his expression had done something. Rearranged. The comfortable irritability he'd walked in with that morning had been replaced by something more specific, more careful. He saw me. Stopped. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You run the equipment check with Rivera today?" "No." Beaumont had a call upstairs. "I know." He looked at the folder. Then at me. "Thursday's assessment." "Yeah. Make sure you're there." He said it like it was standard, like it was administrative. But the way he said "make sure," like there was a reason beyond general protocol, did something quiet to the air. I said, "What's in the folder, Sergeant?" He looked at me for a long moment. "Above your clearance until Thursday," he said, and walked away. The hallway felt different after that. Smaller, somehow, like it was holding its breath. Thursday morning arrived the way serious things arrive, without announcement, without the courtesy of preparation. The assessment range at 0800 was already cold. The kind of cold that doesn't respond to jacket weight or layers. It just sits inside your collar and stays. The range was a modified MOUT facility. Urban simulation, multi-structure, live fire capable with the right clearances. It was the kind of place that had absorbed a lot of failure over the years and had the scars to prove it. There were 11 of us watching. That was the first unusual thing. Standard integration assessments draw maybe 3 or 4 observers, the assessing NCO, maybe a team lead, whoever's on rotation. 11 people meant word had traveled. Word always travels in units. It travels through exactly the kind of low-level comments that have been accumulating since Wednesday morning. Navy girl says she's a combat master. And it travels until a room full of people decides, without organizing it, to show up and see what happens. Doyle was there, in his formal observation posture, hands clasped behind his back, face like a geographic feature. Rivera came through the gate at exactly 0800, duffel on one shoulder. She dropped it at the staging area, signed the range paperwork without reading it. Not because she was careless, but because she'd read exactly that type of paperwork 300 times and knew where everything was and stood easy while the range officer, a master sergeant named Thibodeau, ran through the parameters. 3-stage assessment. First stage, CQB structure clearance. Second stage, sniper scenario, moving target, variable wind. Third stage, undisclosed. Galloway was standing to my left. Third stage, undisclosed, he muttered. They never do that. No, I said. Doyle's got something planned. Looks like it. Thibodeau stepped back. Rivera approached the staging position for stage 1. She drew her weapon, a Sig Sauer she'd cleared, and checked at the equipment line with the speed of someone whose hands have done that exact motion in the dark, in water, in situations we were not clear to know about, and stood at the breach point of the first structure. It's hard to explain what the next 4 minutes looked like if you haven't been in a live clearing environment. I'll try. It wasn't the speed exactly. Speed is common. You can train speed into almost anyone with enough repetition. It was the economy. The way she moved through doorways, the angle she chose, the angle she denied herself, the half-second decisions that usually require conscious thought made so automatic they disappeared below the level of behavior and become something closer to anatomy. She cleared the first room in 9 seconds. 5 targets. The groupings, when Thibodeau walked it afterward, were centered mass, double tap, consistent spacing. Not the groupings of someone who practiced. The groupings of someone who had stopped thinking about it. She flowed into the second room. Behind me, someone said something quiet that I didn't catch. When I turned, the speaker was watching the structure with the kind of attention you pay things when you've revised your opinion and aren't comfortable with the revision yet. The whole structure, 8 rooms, 2 stairwells for breach points, took her 14 minutes and 22 seconds. The range record for that specific configuration was 18 minutes. The range record had stood for 3 years. It belonged to a Delta operator who had stopped by on a training rotation and was, in the context of that unit, something close to a legend. Thibodeau was still looking at his stopwatch when she walked out. She didn't say anything. She walked to the water station, drank half a bottle, capped it, and waited. The 11 observers were very quiet. Galloway, to my left, was not laughing. He wasn't anything, actually. He had the expression of a man whose internal filing system has just been handed a document it has no folder for. Malone, who was standing behind me, said in a voice barely above a breath, "Holy, yeah," I said. Stage 2. The sniper scenario was 400 meters, moving target on a variable rail. The target shifted speed and direction unpredictably, and the wind out of the northwest was running around 12 miles per hour with irregular gusts. Thibodeau read the conditions before she positioned. She didn't use the reading. Or rather, she heard it, processed it, and by the time she'd settled onto the mat, she'd already done the math in a way that her hands understood before her mind finished narrating it. The rifle she'd drawn was a standard issue platform. Not her choice. Not her tool. Whatever she'd built her muscle memory on, it wasn't this. She made 2 scope adjustments. Small ones. First shot, 9 ring. Not center, but inside the clock at 400 meters on a moving target with a borrowed rifle. Second shot, center. Third through 5th, center, 9 ring. 4-5, 400 meters. Moving. Crosswind. Borrowed platform. When the target was retrieved and walked out, Thibodeau looked at it for a moment. He was a man who had assessed shooters for 21 years. I'd seen him react to extraordinary performances before. He usually said something. A single word, maybe tight or clean or once, memorably, that'll do. He looked at that target. He said nothing. He turned to his clipboard and made his marks. Rivera had already started stretching her hands. The small, routine decompression of someone who has been holding tension precision for 5 minutes and knows exactly which tendons need release. Not celebratory. Not relieved. Maintenance. Someone behind me cleared their throat. The air in the range had changed. Not dramatically. Not the way you'd write it in a movie. No collective gasp. No one dropping anything. It was subtler than that. It was the texture of a room that has stopped holding an assumption and doesn't yet have a replacement. 11 people standing in the same cold air they'd arrived in, but standing in it differently. Doyle uncrossed his arms. He crossed them again. He was looking at his folder. Stage 3 was the one nobody had been briefed on. Thibodeau called Rivera over and spoke to her quietly. She nodded once. She walked to the center of the range and stood there. No weapon, no gear, just her. Then 3 men walked out from the staging structure. Combatives instructors. All 3 of them. Unit level. I recognized Martinez from the hand-to-hand rotation. Heavy set, fast for his weight, had put 2 Rangers on the mat in a training session 18 months ago without breathing hard. The other 2 I didn't know by name, but I knew by reputation, the way you know things in a unit. They were the people Doyle sent a problem to when he wanted the problem solved physically. It was a controlled combative scenario. Obviously, standards, safety considerations, no joint locks past a certain threshold. But even in the controlled version, 3 against 1, train instructors, concrete floor, the math was not forgiving. Malone said softly, "Oh, come on." Prentice looked at me. His expression said, "Is this okay?" I looked at Doyle. Doyle was watching Rivera. She was watching the 3 instructors the way she'd watched the room at debrief. She went down without fighting the momentum, which is itself a trained response, used it to come back up at a different angle, and broke his positioning. What she did over the next 4 minutes was not superhuman. It was trained, but there's something about watching a person fight who is trained past the point of thought, where the body is just solving problems continuously without the lag time of conscious decision. That reads different from a ring fight or a demonstration or a movie. It's quieter, more angular. There are no wasted gestures. Martinez went down at minute 2. A controlled takedown, not a knockout, range rules, but she had the position and held it until he tapped. The second instructor lasted another 40 seconds after that. The third, the one on her right, whose name I found out later was Sorensen, was better. He knew what he was doing and adapted faster than the other two. He had her against the barrier at minute 3.5, real pressure, and I heard a sound from someone in the 11-person observation group, something involuntary. She rolled out of it. The mechanics of how aren't important. What's important is that she rolled out of something that looked terminal, got Sorensen center, and ended in under 8 seconds from that point. She stepped back, breathing elevated, a cut above her left eyebrow, bleeding a little from where the barrier contact had caught her. She found a piece of cloth in her vest pocket and pressed it to the cut with the total undrama of someone who has bled before, and found it largely administrative. Martinez was already on his feet, hand extended. She shook it. She walked back to the water station. Doyle said nothing for approximately 20 seconds. Then he opened his folder. Rivera. She turned, front and center. She walked over. He handed her the folder. She looked at it, not reading it. She already knew what was in it, but the gesture of receiving it formally in front of 11 people who had come to watch her fail. I could see the cover page from where I stood. There was a lot of black redaction on it. What I could read was the header. Naval Special Warfare Command, SEAL Combat Master Certification, Enhanced Classification. Rivera, Daria K. Operations, redacted. Commendations, redacted. Field designation, redacted. And at the bottom, in unredacted text, a sentence. I only caught part of it from that distance, but I caught enough. Assessed as among the top 3% of close-quarters specialists in active naval special warfare personnel, Doyle looked at the 11 of us. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say, "Learn something." He didn't moralize. He just looked at us the way a fact looks at you when you've been arguing with it. Then he said to Rivera, "Welcome to the unit." And he walked back toward the admin building. Rivera put the folder in her duffel. She looked up, and for a moment, just a moment, she looked at the 11 of us. No expression of satisfaction. No performance of vindication. She just looked at us. Then she zipped the duffel and walked in the opposite direction from Doyle toward the equipment return line because she had gear to sign back in and she had things to do. The rest of us stood in the cold for a little while. Nobody said anything. The cut above her eyebrow was still bleeding a little. She didn't look back. There's a particular silence that lives inside military units. It's not the silence of people who have nothing to say. It's the silence of people who have made an error in judgment and don't have a protocol for the kind of apology it requires. Not the formal, spoken kind. Something older. Something you have to work out sideways, through behavior, through small acts of recalibration. That's what the 3 days after Thursday looked like. Nobody addressed it directly. In a unit operating at that tempo, with those stakes, there's genuinely no mechanism for, "I was dismissive of your professional qualifications, and I'd like to walk that back formally." It doesn't have a place in the structure. So instead, it happened in the texture of things. Galloway started holding the equipment cage door open when she came through. He didn't announce this. He just started doing it. Malone put her name on the coffee rotation. Prentice, bless him, he was too young to have the complexity about it that the rest of us did. He just walked up to her on Friday morning and said, "I looked up the SEAL Combat Master Track. That's a serious thing." She looked at him. "It's a path," she said. Same answer as before. But something about Prentice being the first one to say it out loud, to use that particular word, serious, made the rest of us breathe slightly differently, like he'd opened a valve. The mission file came down Saturday. I'm not going to specify the operation, classification reasons, but also the operation itself is beside the point of this story. What's relevant is that Doyle structured the team breakdown in a way none of us had seen from him before. He put Rivera on point for the initial breach sequence. Point, not support, not secondary breach. Doyle laid out the breach sequence, and when he got to Rivera's point designation, he just said her name and her position like it was the obvious thing, because by that point, it was the obvious thing. Nobody looked at each other. Nobody exchanged a meaningful glance, because there was nothing to be surprised by anymore. She was what she'd said she was. She'd said what she was. That was the whole story. Except it wasn't. Not entirely. Because what had actually happened that week wasn't just a credentials verification. It was something else. Something more specifically human and less comfortable. What had happened was that 11 people had decided in the first 30 seconds of knowing her who she was and what she could do. And they had decided based on, I want to be precise here, based on the gap between what she looked like and what she said. The gap between a female E4 with a duffel held together by duct tape and the word SEAL Combat Master. That gap felt impossible. The gap was impossible, statistically, in terms of probability, in terms of everything you absorb over years in a community that moves and thinks in certain ways. The gap was genuinely improbable. But impossible and improbable are not the same thing. And what Rivera had done in 3 stages and for minutes of combatives was collapse the gap. Not with an argument, not with anger, not by demanding to be believed or by pointing at the math of our assumption. She had just done the thing and left the rest of us to reckon with the distance between what we'd assumed and what was true. There's a conversation I had with Doyle later, 2 weeks after the assessment. We were in the vehicle bay, post-maintenance rotation, and everyone else had filtered out, and it was just the 2 of us with the particular intimacy of a shared space after work. He said, "You figured it out before the assessment." I thought about lying, decided against it. I wasn't sure, but you didn't laugh. No, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the floor. In '09, he said, I had a translator, in country, small woman, spoke 4 languages, including 2 that had no Latin characters. Could navigate terrain by stars in a region where the stars weren't the same stars I grew up with. He paused. First week I had her, I assumed she needed protecting. He didn't say what came after that. He didn't need to. 3rd week, he said, she pulled me out of a situation. Physical situation. I'm not going to get into it. But she was the reason I didn't come home in a bag. He looked up. I'd been wasting 2 weeks of her ability because I'd already decided what she was capable of. He picked up his jacket from the workbench. The file doesn't change things, you understand. The assessment doesn't change things. What changes things is before that. What you decide to see before the file. Before the assessment. He put the jacket on. That's where the error lives. He walked out. I stayed in the vehicle bay a while. The fluorescent light above the 3rd bay was flickering slightly. Had been flickering for 3 weeks. Maintenance order in the system. Nobody had gotten to it yet. I watched it flicker. Rivera's 3rd week with the unit, she and I were on a vehicle check together. Dawn. Quiet. She was going through the left side rig with the systematic calm of someone who has checked equipment in worse conditions and worse light and didn't need the comfort of daylight to be thorough. I was on the right side, not speaking. After maybe 10 minutes, she said, without looking up from the rig, the laughing didn't bother me. I didn't know how to answer that. People decide things fast, she said. In the field, fast decisions save lives. It's not surprising that the habit extends. It's not a great habit when it's pointed at your own people. She looked up then, looked at me directly. No, she said. It's not. She went back to the rig. Another few minutes. Can I ask you something? I said, sure. When you walked in, Wednesday morning, you knew. You knew how it would land. She was quiet for a moment. Something went through her face, small and quick, that I couldn't name. I knew, she said. And you said it anyway. I answered the question I was asked. She adjusted something on the rig. Accurately. I thought about that. You could have softened it. Led with something else. She stopped what she was doing. Set her hands flat on the vehicle. Looked at the middle distance. Yeah, she said. I could have. She picked up her tool again. Once. The once sat in the air. I understood what it meant. The once meant that softening, qualifying, preemptively managing other people's assumptions about you. It has a cost. The first time you do it, it's strategy. The second time, it starts becoming the way you narrate yourself. And somewhere around the 10th time, the softening becomes so automatic that you've edited yourself out of your own story. She'd chosen accuracy instead. Every time, in every room, regardless of the atmospheric drop that followed. That took something, a different kind of courage from the breach point courage or the 4 minutes against 3 courage. A smaller, lonelier, more sustained kind. 6 weeks in, the unit ran a joint exercise with a British Special Forces element, which meant a new room full of new people, new assumption-forming mechanisms, new atmospheric drops. We were in the briefing when the British team lead, a major lean, all-efficiency, looked at our team lineup and paused at Rivera. The pause was familiar. I've been watching for it, Doyle said, without inflection, before anything else could happen. Specialist Rivera, SEAL Combat Master, point element. He said it the same way you say a coordinate. Clinical, definitive, already fact, not introduction. The British major looked at her. She looked back. The major said, point element, and made his notation. And we moved on. I caught Malone's eye across the table. He made the smallest gesture with his chin. Almost nothing. But it was something. It was we see it now. We know what we had. We know what we almost missed. The last thing I'll tell you is small. Maybe a month later. Early evening. Most of the unit had cleared out. I was finishing paperwork, that particular administrative purgatory that never fully empties, and Rivera was at the table across from me, doing the same. Neither of us was speaking. The building had that after-hours quality, quieter than quiet, the HVAC system audible for the first time. She had a notebook open, not digital, paper. She was writing something in it, actual longhand, which I'd never seen any of the others do. I wasn't reading it, just noticed. You keep notes. I said. Habit, she said. From training? From before. She didn't elaborate. I went back to my paperwork. A minute passed. My trainer told me something, she said. Unprompted. Quiet. When I was coming up through the CQC track. She said. She paused. Something in her voice did a small thing I hadn't heard from it before. She said, the most important part of being this good is being willing to keep showing up to rooms that don't want you to be this good. She closed the notebook. I write it at the top of every notebook, she said. First page. Before anything else. She put the notebook in her bag. She finished her paperwork. She said good night and walked out. I sat there for a while. The fluorescent light down the hall, not the one in the vehicle bay, a different one, another one nobody gotten to yet, was flickering. I looked at my own paperwork, and I thought about all the rooms in the world that have people in them who've already decided in the first 30 seconds what's possible for the person sitting across from them. I thought about the distance between that decision and the truth. I thought about Rivera walking into every single one of those rooms with her duct-tape duffel and her compressed voice and her notebook and her willingness to say the accurate thing, the whole thing, the true thing every single time. Not for them, for the record, because the record was going to be right whether they believed it or not. She said what she was, and then she went ahead and was it. That's all she ever did. That was everything.